Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. The winner of this month's poll is next part of my patch by patch coverage of World of Warcraft. We're still in the pre-release state of the game, which holds many interesting artifacts from the past. In the last one, we covered point 7, which had things such as the old skill point system, the addition of resistances, mounts, the postal system saw the light of day, and much more. Quite the big patch. Patch point 8 was quite sizable itself, with quite a few huge features being added to the game, the first of which being the auction house. Auctioneer NPCs have been placed in each major city. They're faction specific, allowing Alliance characters to trade with other Alliance characters, and vice versa for the Horde. We talked about this very recently in my computer games article actually. Although Blizzard weren't the first to have something like this, they were probably the ones to optimize it. Before this, in most MMOs, to trade items you'd have to bark in some sort of trading channel, or post on the forums or whatever, so having a vehicle to host all of your stuff and serve as the middleman, believe it or not, was cutting edge at the time. And something that a lot of people don't know, I think, is that back then, each of these auction houses were independent at first, meaning that auctions put up in Stormwind could only be bought in Stormwind, and so on for the other cities. This was quite confusing and cumbersome for players though, so in patch point 9 before release, they took out all but one for each faction, leaving just Ironforge for the Alliance and Orgrimmar for the Horde. Now, I can't find any patch notes proving it, but I swear that in vanilla, we did indeed at some point see a return of this unlinked system. I remember traveling to each major city and checking each auction house to see if it had an item that I was looking for, but I can't find proof that it was actually a thing. I feel like it's a Berenstain or Berenstain sort of thing, so for the sake of my sanity, if anyone in the comments can either confirm or deny this, that would be much appreciated. What I do know though was that in patch 1.9 they were all linked together anyways, so it didn't matter where you posted it. So, the auction house. Just another example of how ahead of the time the game was back then. Speaking of which, this patch was also when the talent system first saw the light of day. Talents are now available for the warrior and mage classes. Players can open their talent interface by clicking the button or pressing N, and they'll eventually be available for all classes. So, as you remember, at this point, we had that weird skill point system that was common in RPGs back then. You level up, get skill points, and put it into main stats, weapon proficiencies, trade skills, mount training, and so on, and this style in general was much more intricate and difficult for players, requiring some research before they spend every single point so they don't end up building dud characters. If you've read the old pre-release articles of the game, you know that the developer's main goal was to make it much more casual friendly than everything else at the time. There was an open market for a game that's easy to hop into and to understand, and as they say, one that doesn't make you want to cry in the corner after messing up. This talent system was basically born from this mentality. No more dull attribute increases, but rather added affixes to certain spells such as increased damage, reduced cooldowns or resource cost, and even new skills entirely, complete with a neat and intuitive interface with nifty art in the background unique for each spec. Much more digestible for the average player. The only thing that wasn't friendly at this point was the fact that you couldn't respec, but as you would imagine, this didn't last for long. In fact, the direct next patch after this, they would add a respec NPC for players wanting to try different builds. As you can see, they're quite similar in looks to the final product that we got. It's just that certain nodes are in different spots, or they just changed different things. In general, they're a bit more confusing to navigate, with many more nodes requiring prerequisites, and some even requiring nodes from 2 different directions. Here we see a form of the old troll regeneration racial in the protection warrior tree, which is pretty funny. And lots of improvement to sex, which is always a good thing. Other than that though, they're the talent trees pretty much. 3 specs that progress downward to more substantial buffs or abilities. As for the skill points, these weren't completely phased out yet, as they would still be used for things such as trade skills, But as you'll see in upcoming episodes, their days will be coming to an end as the game shifts further into the casual atmosphere leading up to release. PvP saw some big changes last patch, as you may remember, with the addition of actual PvP servers. Now that people were getting into the thick of it with each other though, a lot of imbalanced aspects of PvP were starting to become clear. In this patch, they introduced diminishing returns to all crowd control spells. That's right, before this you could get locked down pretty much infinitely, which was quite problematic, especially considering that those spells lasted for a full minute at the time. You know, that's pretty funny that they didn't think of that. I mean, crap. I got sapped. Well, let me go get a beer. Ah, love PvP.
2 hours later.
Oh, it's about to wear off. Son of a... Anyways, where was I? Another PvP related change is the new guard system, which makes it so NPCs will call for guards whenever there's a player of the enemy faction nearby. The questing hubs were getting overrun quite easily, I suppose, so this was introduced to try and add some sort of safety for the lower level players just trying to do some questing. As you can see, it's mainly for the areas under level 20, since there are probably level 40s just camped out there sometimes, terrorizing the newer players. I remember the worst offender was the mushroom vendor in the Terran Mill. This guy patrolled around and would sneak up on players and summon a bunch of guards to chase you down, and even worse was when they added dishonorable kills, but I'll save that particular rant for when we get to that patch. And here we have the click to move option being introduced, and your first thought may be that this is one of those weird pre-release things that never made it to the live game. Well, it isn't the live game in fact, it's just that barely anyone knows about it. If you go into the interface and then the mouse menu, you'll see it right there, and if you choose, you can click to move your character. And just how in the last patch, the level cap was raised to 45, point 8 saw an increase to level 50, so just 10 more from the cap. And of course, some new zones and dungeons were also added for players to explore, and that's Ishara, the Blasted Lands, and the Searing Gorge zones, and the Sunken Temple and the Razorfen Downs as dungeons. The Blasted Lands was quite the iconic zone, of course holding the Dark Portal, which was featured in the RTS games. Here's what it looked like in its patch 0.8 state. And at this point with these beta maps, I'd like to point out just how segmented the world is. This is the orange zone, and next door is the green zone, and there's the dark forest zone, and next to that is the swamp. Looking at the map, it's quite the color palette, and transitioning between the zones made you feel like you're entering a new world since it was such a different setting. It really made the world seem that much bigger, and you're always wondering what's around the next corner. The funny thing about Ishara though was that even at release, it was pretty much unfinished, and it would remain unfinished all the way until the Cataclysm expansion nearly a decade later, if you can believe it. Halfway through designing the zone, the developers realized that they kind of screwed themselves since it was a nightmare to navigate geographically. It was basically a giant cliff and a chasm, and if you fell down there, forget it. The zone was filled with elite enemies, and finding a way back up was extremely difficult if you didn't know the lay of the land. So because of this, they just sort of threw their hands up and went, ah well, and they scrapped it midway through, leaving it as mainly an area for exploration or grinding. It was actually a really popular spot for the old gold selling bots since no one was ever there. There would be these hunters killing the blue dragons there, obviously botting, but no one was ever there to report them, so one way or the other, the zone did see its uses. There was also the Azurgos world boss, and some sadistic developer also decided that it would be a good idea to throw the Aqua Quintessence vendor there as well. You needed this to douse the runes in the Molten Core raid, and if you weren't revered with the Hydraxian Waterlords, you'd have to go all the way out there every time to get a new one, and it wasn't even somewhere convenient. It was on an island in the ocean, in the middle of nowhere, in a zone that was in the middle of nowhere. The zone itself was also a bit different. Right near the entrance was an area called the Forlorn Ridge, and at release, this was blocked off by a big mountain, but in the beta, you had a little path that led you up. It's rumored that this was going to be the site of a battleground called the Ashara Crater, but that was eventually scrapped and they closed it off on the live servers. There were even Horde and Alliance footholds on each side of the mountain, which would serve as entrances to the battleground. Another interesting point here is the addition of the planesjourneying ability for the Tauren. I think this is one of the more widely known quirks of early World of Warcraft, so I won't spend too much time at this, but at first, Taurens didn't get mounts. They instead got the planesjourneying ability, which made you serve as your own mount, sort of. You'd have to build up a gallop by running around without being hit, and you'd move faster and faster until eventually you reach a top speed, which would match the mounted speed of any other race, as long as nothing was hitting you. So, as you'd imagine, it gave an unfair advantage in PvP, since you could just run circles around people. As long as you could kite, it was like being able to attack while on a mount, making Tauren hunters quite the force to be reckoned with. So that's why it fades on hit, and can't be cast on combat. Because of this though, it made it inferior to the normal mounts that everyone else had. Whereas only days would dismount you from the normal mounts, Taurens just needed to be hit, making it much harder to maneuver around everything. And you also lost your momentum whenever you stopped, so it was sort of like that movie Speed with Keanu Reeves, where you had to keep moving, unless you wanted to take another 10 seconds to ramp up again. It would trigger unintentionally when walking up to enemies, so people would facepull by accident from the unexpected speed boost, so it was eventually scrapped since there were so many annoyances tied to it. A remnant of planes running did remain though. Some of you may remember the Samantha Swifthoof NPC patrolling the roads of Stranglethorn Vale. She was intended to be involved with teaching Tauren players planesjourneying somehow, and when they scrapped that, they forgot to remove her from the game as well, leaving her to patrol the jungle and scare lower level Alliance players. Speaking of mounts, another interesting change here is that the mount speed in general was increased, significantly in fact. Considering that the normal mount speed was just 60%, I'd wager that before this, it would have been around the 30ish to 40ish range. Can you imagine grinding to 40 back then, and gathering up all of your gold, and finally you can make use of the new amazing mounts, and you're getting outrun by a hunter with aspect of the cheetah. There were also a bunch of class balance changes, as you'd expect. I'll cover the highlights here, such as the addition of Polymorph for mages, which would end up being one of their signature spells. Just in time for that diminishing return change too. And this was also when they got their portal spells, which let them and any raid members fast travel to any of the major cities, which was a godsend back then. Unless you had the mages who would open up a portal to Darnassus at the end of the raid just to troll people. And something interesting for rogues is that their block ability was removed. That's right, rogues used to be able to equip shields back then. Well, to clarify, there were actually two shield types, called shields and bucklers. The burly classes, such as warriors or paladins, used the shields, and the rogues used the bucklers, which were less cumbersome and typically had agility-based stats on them. And not just them, but even hunters could use them up until this patch. In 0.8, however, they took bucklers away from rogues and hunters, and they melded them into the shield armor type to simplify things. Some remnants of defensive rogues did remain though. Remember those old Defias that used shields back in the day? That's what certain rogue players would have looked like had they been inclined for survivability. And the rest system was also still going through some changes. In this one, they finally landed on the release version, which was just 2 states. Rested at 200% XP and normal at 100%, so it took a while, but we finally got there. As always, there's a lot more, but I mainly just wanted to hit the highlights for you. If you'd like to give these notes a read through yourself, I'll have a link in the description. I hope you're enjoying this series so far. I think this could be a nice thing to try and do once every month, sort of emulate the time between these patches as they were released way back when. That could be neat, I think. Anyways, I'll sign off here. Like the video if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.